The gens Cornelia was one of the most distinguished Roman gens, and produced a greater number of illustrious men than any other house at Rome. The first of this gens to achieve the consulship was Servius Cornelius Cassius Malugiensis, who held that office in 485 BC. The gens was a major contributor to the highest offices of the Republic, and contested for consulships with the Fabii and the Valerii from the 3rd century BC. Over 30% of all consulships were held by men from this gens. Several great commanders also came from this family. The origin of the Cornelii is lost to history, but the nomen Cornelius may be formed from the hypothetical cognomen corneus, meaning horny, that is, having thick or calloused skin. The existence of such a cognomen in early times may be inferred from its diminutive, Cornelis. Another possibility is that the name is related to the surname Cassius, used by the most ancient branch of the gens. Cassius may be an archaic praenomen used by the ancestors of the Cornelii, which was subsequently used as a cognomen by the family. A similar instance is found in the patrician Furia gens, originally Fusia, which was evidently derived from the archaic praenomen Fusius. That gens later used Fusius as a cognomen, just as the Cornelii did with Cassius. Long after that branch of the family had disappeared, Cassius was revived as a praenomen by the later Cornelii. Praenomina. The Cornelii employed a wide variety of praenomina, although individual families tended to favor certain names and avoid others. Servius, abbreviated Sir, Lucius, L, Publius, P, Gnaeus, CN, and Marcus, M, were common to most branches. Aulus, A, was used by the Cornelii Cossi. Gaius, C, was used by both the Cornelii Sedugi and Lentuli. The praenomen Tiberius, T, also appears once amongst the Lentuli, who later revived the former cognomen Cassius as a praenomen. In the 1st century BC, the dictator Lucius Cornelius Sulla named his twin children Faustus, F, and Fausta, reviving an old praenomen that was regularly used by his descendants over the next 2 centuries, and making the Cornelii the only patrician family known to have used that name. Sulla's youngest daughter is believed to have been named Postuma, although no other instances of this name amongst the Cornelii are known. Branches and cognomina. The gens included both patricians and plebeians, but all its great families belonged to the patrician order. The names of the patrician families are Arvina, Blasio, Sedgus, Cinna, Cassius, Delabella, Lentulus, Malugiensis, Mamula, Miranda, Murila, Rufinus, Scapula, Scipio, Caesna, and Sulla. The names of the plebeian families are Balbus and Gallus, and we also find various cognomina, as Chrysogonus, Culalus, Fagida, etc., given to freedmen of this gens. There are also several plebeians mentioned without any surname. Under the empire the number of cognomina increased considerably. The most ancient stirps of the Cornelii bore the cognomina Cassius and Malugiensis. The Cossi and Malugienses were probably one family originally, for at first both these surnames are united, as for instance, in the case of Servius Cornelius Cassius Malugiensis, consul in 485 BC. Afterwards, however, the Cossi and Malugienses became 2 separate families. The Cossi produced many illustrious men in the 4th and 5th centuries BC, but afterwards sunk into oblivion. The last consuls from this stirp bore the surname Marvina. The name Cassius was afterwards revived as a praenomen in the family of the Lentuli, who belonged to the same gens. The Malugienses last held consular authority in 367 BC. The Cornelii Scipion first appear at the beginning of the 4th century BC, with Publius Cornelius Scipio, said to have been magister equitum to the dictator Marcus Furius Camillus in 396 BC. The Capitoline Fasti identified the magistratum of that year as Publius Cornelius Malugiensis, suggesting that the Scipianes may have originated as a branch of the Malugienses. The surname Scipio, which signifies a stick or staff, is said to have been originally given to a Cornelius, because he served as a staff in directing his blind father, Patrum pro bacula regbat, and to have been handed down by him as a family name to his descendants. This family produced some of the greatest men in Rome, and to them she was more indebted than to any others for the empire of the world. They bore the agnomina Africanus, Asiaticus, Azina, Barbatus, Calvus, Hispalis, Nasica, and Serapio. With the additional cognomen Orphitus, the family remained prominent until the 2nd century AD. Lentulus was the name of one of the haughtiest families of the Cornelian gens, so that Cicero coins the words Apietas and Lentulus to express the qualities of the high patrician party. When we find plebeians bearing the name, as tribunes of the plebs, they were no doubt descendants of freedmen. Lentulus was said to be derived from lens, a lentil, much as Cicero is said to be derived from cicer, a chickpea. However, the Latin adjective lentulus means slow. The lentuli first appear in history at the time of the Gallic sack of Rome, early in the 4th century BC, and from that time remained prominent until the 1st century AD. They bore the agnomina Caudinus, Clodianus, Crus, Getulicus, Lupus, Malugiensis, Marcellinus, Niger, Rufinus, Scipio, Spinther, and Sura. The Corneae Rufini appear in the latter half of the 4th century BC, beginning with Publius Cornelius Rufinus, dictator in 334 BC. From the surname Rufinus, meaning reddish, one may infer that the first of this family had red hair. A descendant of this family was the first to assume the cognomen Sulla, about the time of the Second Punic War. The name is probably a diminutive of Sura, a cognomen found in several gens, including among the Cornelii Lentuli. Plutarch, who erroneously believed that the dictator Sulla was the first to bear the name, thought it must have referred to a blotchy, reddish complexion, while Macrobius Ambrosius Theodosius derives it from Sibylla, an etymology that is rejected by Quintilian. The Sulli continued in the highest offices of the state well into imperial times. Some of them bore the agnomen Felix. The Dolabili first came to prominence at the beginning of the 3rd century BC, and so remained until the second half of the 1st century AD. The Cornelii Blasians flourished for about a century, beginning in the early 3rd century BC. The Setigi, who first appear in the latter half of the 3rd century BC, were described by Quintus Horatius Flaccus as Cinctudi Setigi, for their old-fashioned practice of wearing their arms bare. They remained prominent for the next 2 centuries. Murilla signifies enzel, or blackbird. The family that bore this surname rose from obscurity at the beginning of the 2nd century BC, and continued for the next century. The Cornelii Cini flourished from the late 2nd century BC to the early decades of the empire. The Cornelii Balbi were, properly speaking, no part of the Cornelia gens. The first of this name was not a Roman, he was a native of Gades, and his original name probably bore some resemblance to the Latin Balbus. Gaius Cornelius Gallus, the poet, and later prefect of Egypt, was evidently of Gallic descent, coming as a young man from the town of Forum Julii, and presumably manumitted by one of the Cornelii Cini or Sulli. None of his descendants achieved any prominence. Over 30% of all the consuls of the Republican period of ancient Rome were Cornelians. The notable men and women of the Cornelii family are listed separately, below.